Hi there, folks. Welcome to another episode of the A Minute to Midnight Show. This is Tony coming to you from New Zealand. And with me on the show, I have my friend in Ohio, John Haller. And John, it's going to be, I believe, a fascinating discussion today. I wish it wasn't so serious because there's a lot of interesting things going on, but of course they are interesting in one sense and alarming in another sense. So welcome back, John.
Well, you're good to be with you, Tony. Did you mean serious or Syria?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I did a podcast with my friend Tom Hughes the other day, and we had just been together, a couple of weeks ago in California for a conference, and we'd done a podcast, I think a week ago Monday, and they were like, Monday was like, we need to do another one because who had meltdown in Syria on their end time bingo card for this week.
Yeah.
And I think that I don't think anybody really did. I mean, I think there's explanations for it, but it's a kind of a fascinating topic and issue, and it has a lot of apocalyptic overtones with some of the articles that are being written about it, and we can talk about that.
Well, I guess, Syria is a huge thing that's going on amongst all the other things at the moment. Basically, Syria's been a battleground for years, but it's been out of the news somewhat. But now you've got not only the NATO and Russia clashing over the Ukraine, but in essence, it's another clash between them in Syria, really. And you've got Biden's national security advisor, Jake Sullivan, saying that basically Al-Qaeda is an ally. Something's pretty wrong when you're hearing that coming from the U.S. administration.
Well, there's actually some people have suggested that some of the groups in conflict in Syria, some are supported by the CIA and some are supported by the Pentagon that are conflicting, and which I think might actually be true. And I was trying to describe for someone today what I think is going on in Syria. I used to have a pair of headphones, and I would carry them around all the time, and I'd carefully wrap them up and I'd stick them in my pocket. And then I would pull them out, and I hadn't done anything, and I would pull them out of my pocket, and they were it was in a giant bunch of knots that I'd have to pick. And I'm like, and that's kind of like Syria. It's kind of like a bowl of black spaghetti, and then they throw all the decals of all the different groups that are fighting each other on top of it. But Syria's been a problem for a long time. We were in Israel back in March of 2011. We had spent the day prior to that up at Capernaum and Mount of Beatitudes, Golan Heights, the regions up there in the north of Israel. And then we took a boat across the Sea of Galilee, and we are actually staying at a resort at the south end of the Sea of Galilee. So we wake up in the morning, it's just this beautiful morning. Beautiful spring morning, sun, the Sea of Galilee was like glass. And then I picked up the news to look at the news, and they said there are these riots in Syria. Well, when you're in the southern end of the Sea of Galilee, you're right in that part of Israel where the borders of Jordan, Syria, and Israel come together. And so Daraa, where the riots were taking place, was 30 miles away from where I was sitting. And so here I am in this beautiful, pastoral, calm, peaceful thing. And 30 miles away is the beginning of the meltdown of this country in the Middle East, which at the time had 23 or 24 million people. It's probably, I don't know, it would be generous, I think, to say that it's 2/3 the size now in terms of population that it was 13 years ago, almost 14 years ago. There are probably over 1 million people dead. There are probably 8 to 12 million people displaced, 3 million refugees in Turkey, between 2 and 3 million in Jordan and another 1.5 million in Syria, or I mean, and in Lebanon. And so there's been different groups that are controlling different parts of Syria. Some supported by the U.S., some not. I think, and it's a game where everybody's playing chess, I guess, to see who can outwit the other or outlast the other. So it's been very calm, relatively calm. Although there's always clashes. There's a number of websites. There's a website called South Front, which tracks the wars in Ukraine, the war in Syria, the wars in Israel. I've been following South Front and other places for years. That's been a problem with what's going on in Syria. The country's all split up. It's not really much of the Syria that you think of on a map is not the actual Syria. The Syria that Assad controls is very small. And then places where it's calm, but what happened, and there's a lot of dispute as to who caused what, but it's pretty clear, I think, that Assad had a problem and he decided to align with the Iranians. The Russians came in to help. And then what they did was they literally bombed the smithereens out of Sunni areas in Syria. And those people left. They became refugees. And millions of them ended up in Europe, which is destabilizing Europe as well. And a lot of governments in Europe have gone along with this. So, they've accepted these refugees, and it's causing massive problems. I mean, we've had open borders here in the United States for most of the last 16 years, and now how's that problem going to be resolved?
Well, the thing is with all of this, I mean, you basically got Sunni versus Shia Muslim, and then you've got different factions backing different sides, and it would seem, I would say, that Turkey is probably backing this new al-Nusra, Al-Qaeda, whatever you want to call them, ISIS blend kind of coup.
Yeah. ISIS kind of broke up, although there's still a lot of ISIS cells in the Syrian desert that cause problems from time to time. So Turkey has aligned with the remnants of Al-Qaeda and ISIS that have formed into these militias. And I don't even remember which one. I think the Syrian Defense Forces is the one it's also called HST, I think, that Turkey supports. Turkey would like to reconstitute the Ottoman Empire. Erdogan's been in power for 20 years now. He's taken what was a secular Turkey, where you were not supposed to wear the hijab.
Yeah,
men weren't supposed to wear the fez, and now that's very common in Turkey. He's jailed more journalists than any other country on the planet in the last 10 years. He's completely the Turkish military was always a check on the rise of any president who might have Islamic leanings. He's completely gutted that and turned it into an Islamic army. He was in fact, there was just a speech he gave last week at some religious conference where he said the West is going to collapse and effectively we're going to help it. Because
John, this is an interesting thing, though, because Turkey's supposedly a US ally, but then again, is it a Russian ally? And, you've got them backing these Sunni, terrorist groups, basically. Then you've got Russia sort of behind Bashar al-Assad, but Russia's hands are tied because of the Ukraine war to some extent. So whose side is Turkey actually on, really? And
Turkey is on the side of the Muslim Brotherhood. Right. I don't think there's any question about that. Yeah. So Assad's family comes from a region of Syria that's largely Alawite Muslim. They're sort of a branch of Shia, but not really. But they've aligned with Syria or with Iran to do Iran's bidding. And so Iran has sponsored Hezbollah groups, militias in Syria to help Assad in his fight against these different jihadi groups. But from the perspective of a country like Israel, Israel's looking at it and saying, well, Menachem Begin, who was the prime minister of Israel years ago, when Iran, back in the 80s, when Iran and Iraq had that 8-year war where there were a couple million killed. I mean, it's interesting. You start looking at these wars that we've had over the past 60, 70 years. And some of these wars, they're like 1-2 million people killed. And we just sort of act like, you have Vietnam. I saw a graphic of the Korean War this morning. That was over 2 million Koreans dead on both sides total.
Yeah.
And plus 50,000 Americans and I don't know, 45, 50,000 Americans in Vietnam, which was, when I was becoming draft age 50 years ago. And we just sort of act like it. So here's Assad. So let's say there's 600,000 dead. It's probably over 1 million. Tony, where are the protests? So, Israel, let's just say the numbers are marginally accurate. Israel's killed 40,000 in Gaza.
Yeah.
And so Assad and his group are responsible for 1 million deaths in Syria since 2011. Where are the protests at Columbia and Harvard and UCLA about the dead Arabs in Syria? It doesn't even register on anybody's radar. And the brutality of this stuff is just unbelievable. So when Iran and Iraq were fighting, Israel knew whoever wins is going to come after us. It doesn't make any difference. Saddam Hussein doesn't like us, and Iran doesn't like us. And so Menachem Begin's response was, well, who should we? He says, let's hope that they're both very successful in their fight against each other. And I think that's sort of how a friend of mine in Israel who's a military security expert, said that. He quoted Menachem Begin last week, because whoever wins in Syria is going to be a problem for Israel down the road. There's just no doubt about it. The question is who's going to be more brutal. And I think Israel sort of, when they're looking at it, they say, maybe we'd like Assad because he's a known factor and we can kind of control him. But if the other side comes in, we know what a relatively small group of ISIS people did across Syria and Iraq 10 years ago.
But the problem is, like I say, I go back to what I said earlier, Jake Sullivan, Biden's national security advisor, is basically saying Al-Qaeda and these people are US allies in a sense, which is like, hang on a second, aren't these the very people you were trying to fight against and take out of power and so on? And then Anthony Blinken as well. Blinken and Jake Sullivan, they're both Council on Foreign Relations, Trilateral Commission,
globalist as well, right?
Yeah. So what is really behind all of this? I mean, that's what I sort of look at and go, okay, so we see all the kind of stuff going on the ground, but what's the real thing going on? Who's backing what and why? And the whole world's going ballistic at the moment. It's just like nuts.
Well, yesterday, I'll give you an example. So I got there's these open source intelligence guys that I follow on Twitter, and they're pretty good. And some of them started tweeting, Russia's leaving their naval base in Syria. And it's like, oh, great. Maybe Russia's having a lot of trouble. They're not. I don't think Russia's doing that great in Ukraine. That's my own personal view. They've lost. I mean, certainly casualties, dead and wounded in Ukraine between Russia and Syria exceed well over 1 million.
Yeah.
And we don't even talk about it. Putin, I don't trust him. He has his own agenda. I think Zelensky has his agenda. And I'll be honest with you, sometimes it's difficult to figure out exactly what they're trying to accomplish.
World war. Maybe that's the thing. Maybe they're just players, John, in getting us all to world war because that's what the handlers want.
Well, yeah, and it may be what Putin wants too. I mean, so what did Putin do? His Navy appears to abandon the base, but this morning I'm reading the press, and what they did was they went out in the Eastern Mediterranean And they had a big war game naval exercise using hypersonic missiles.
Yeah, and that's the thing. That's what Russia does have that no one else has got. And
Right. Now,
yeah,
there was a good article in Forbes the other day where a guy kind of went through the physics of this Oberchink or whatever missile that
yeah,
was launched in Ukraine last week. And he said, maybe it was a great light show and it was done to instill fear in people, but we don't know. It certainly flies fast, but we don't know how accurate it is. And I think that's probably true. They're still in the development phase of these things, but still, I mean, who wants to take the risk of them
yeah,
figuring it out between this launch and the next one?
yeah,
And so it can change very, very quickly. So, look, Israel did very well, I think, in Lebanon. They have it. And I know everybody doesn't support Israel. I do. I spent a lot of time there. Um, Israel had a very, very difficult situation with Gaza. They had a situation with Lebanon, and they've sort of managed this since the last Lebanon war in 2006, and then the situation in Lebanon since then, and then Gaza since 2005. The people in charge of Israel, the best thing you can say about it is they thought they could manage the problem of the radical jihadists of Hamas and Hezbollah. And it didn't work. They weren't coming across the border, but it was always a problem. And then the question is, so in the north, when we started talking about this, me and friends of mine, when Israel started having this problem October 7th, and then Hezbollah entered the next day firing rockets and missiles into Israel, we knew that Israel was going to have to do something. Israel was going to have to go into Gaza, was going to have to go into Lebanon. And I was talking to security experts who'd been studying this for years, and their concern was that it would not take long for Israel to have 17 to 20,000 dead IDF soldiers, plus hundreds of dead civilians. Now, that hasn't come to fruition. In the war, they've lost about 800 in Gaza, but about half of those were on October 7th. So about under 500 since October 7th in Gaza and in Lebanon, which they only lost 50, but they've taken out probably over 4,000 Hezbollah fighters in that time. And so to me, there's sort of they've done much, much better, but they haven't solved the problem.
yeah.
They still have a massive problem.
Yeah.
And Hezbollah was so deeply embedded. I mean, I've heard people who've been in tunnels up there where they said the tunnels are 200 feet underground. They have dormitories and lights and internet and weapons storage and weapons manufacturing and that type of thing. And I don't know how Israel, I don't know what the situation is. Israel can't live like that. 80,000 people have left the north. 60,000 people or more have left the south. You have 150,000 people 400 and some days after Hezbollah or Hamas came into the Gaza area in southern Israel. You have 150,000 people who don't live where they live. It's devastating economically. The soldiers are tired. So I think the ceasefire was part because Israel's not getting the Biden administration is slow walking weapons supplies to Israel. Eventually Israel will say, we're just going to make them ourselves. But there's a logistical problem of ramping up that quickly. And I think the soldiers are tired. They've been deployed, some for over 200 days. And I think the United States, with these constant deployments of soldiers in hot zones around the world, are wearing out our military,
I remember
so
saying, I think I said to you right early on, not long after October 7th, and I said, well, they can go in there and they can do this and this, and everyone was saying Israel should do it. But I remember saying, but you can't wipe out an ideology. And really, as soon as you they take out this lot and that lot, but they're not actually destroying the ideology behind Hamas or Hezbollah. You can't, because they're just, more people will just arise out of it. So this is like a never-ending cycle.
Well, this is very much an end for me, being a Bible prophecy guy. This is very much an end time scenario. Let me give you an example. So
agree.
David Wormser is a great security guy. He's Jewish. He works for a think tank in Israel and the Center for Security Policy here in the United States, but very intelligent. He's worked in the security establishment in our government. And he wrote an article this week. It's a Jewish News Syndicate at JNS. And it's titled, they had two titles. The title at JNS is Reflections on the Outlandish, Navigating the Strategic Earthquake in the Fertile Crescent, referring to the Syrian war. He did an interview with Carolyn Glick last night about it. His article at his Substack was titled, Prepare for the Disintegration of Syria and the Rise of something about Turkey, the Turkish, the rise of Turkey,
right?
Oh, the rise of Imperial Turkey.
Oh, yeah.
And so, I mean, but if you read through the article, it's like he says this. Just listen to the opening paragraph: the desolation wrought on Hezbollah by Israel and the humiliation inflicted on Iran has not only left the Iranian axis exposed to Israeli power and further withering, it has altered the strategic tectonics of the Middle East. The story is not just Iran anymore. The region is showing the first signs of a tremendous geopolitical change, and the pieces on the board are beginning to move. So it is like this giant chess game. And so my question, I agree with you that there are people orchestrating this, and I'm just not sure what their ultimate end game is, unless they want. Clearly, we're in the midst of a world war. I don't think there's anybody that can argue that we're not at this point. It's just not gone hot everywhere. So Russia's threatening nuclear annihilation. They've changed their nuclear policy. And that's all. And look, I know
though, John, let's not forget, that's in response to every red line that Putin has set, saying don't step over it, that the West has. NATO has gone over them. So you can't blame Russia for changing. Not that I'm a fan of Putin. I believe, again, Putin was a protege of Klaus Schwab's School of Young Global Leaders under a different name, So Putin, I believe, is a player, globalist player, doing his own thing. But in a sense, he's still protecting the Russian, motherland or whatever.
I think, and I have friends in Ukraine that I rely on for some additional information, and there's no love lost with Russia, and so we always talk about the CIA went in and did the 2014 color revolution or whatever. But when I talk to you, the Ukrainians I know, which is a small sample, but they're like, we were on board with that because there was a Russian stooge that was running things and everybody hated him. So you didn't see, and so, but now things have spun out of control. Putin has his agenda. Zelensky has his. The crazy people in Washington have their agenda, and and then the question is, we're in the midst of a presidential transition here in the United States. Is it going to change anything? Somebody asked me last week. You're an end times guy. You think this is moving towards this final conflagration in the world? Did the election of Trump slow it down? Is it a reprieve? And I'm like, no, I haven't seen anything slow down since Trump. Now, Trump's not in office, but I haven't really seen anything slow down. It's kind of sped up, I think.
That's exactly what I'm thinking. Just like moving on slightly, you sent me earlier a couple of pictures from the Economist magazine. Now, I believed all along and have used Economist magazine in the past as, basically it was a Rothschild's founded magazine and all that. And they have an eerie and uncanny ability to predict the future, or is it that they're not just predicting it out of pulling it out of a hat, but that they've got inside information as to what the goals are, not that they necessarily work out exactly how the elites or the global illuminists plan them, but I believe they have a goal and a way they're trying to get us there. And when you look at the two covers that you sent me, it's pretty amazing. Do you want to just have a look?
So the one is from 2012, and it's something about the roadmap to hell or something like that. And it's this picture. So at the top, there are two dragons that are like with hang gliders underneath them. One is Hamas. This is 2012, December of 2012. Hamas, and the other one is Netanyahu with Israel. And then in the middle, there's an explosion. And in the middle of the explosion, it says wrath.
Yeah.
And you see the Acropolis crumbling. You see the U.S. Capitol kind of falling down. Wall Street, the Uncle Sam drunk with oil. And then in the lake of fire there, you see Gaddafi.
Yeah.
And I don't know when Gaddafi got killed. In the middle of the lake of fire, you see Putin and Assad right there in the middle of the photograph. Yeah. And then you see Obama on this river of blood or fire in a little boat going down the river with his thumb up, and it says pride on it. This is 2012.
Yeah.
It's crazy. And then overseeing it all from his perch atop everything is clearly Satan.
Yeah.
Holding The Economist magazine. And next to him is a control box with levers, and it's called climate change.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's sort of like, well, wait a minute. By the way, the Washington Post recently published a thing about, and I disagree, I'm a young Earth guy, but they talk about 450 million years of history in the world and the global surface temperature. It's been warmer almost the whole way through than it is now. There's only been a little tiny spike in the last, and it's inconsequential. And the world is running around like, oh, this climate change is the worst thing ever. It's cooler now than it's been for most of the history of the earth. And this is a chart, this is a Washington Post. And so it's clear that this is a made-up thing.
Yes.
They're destroying economies. And then when you layer on top of that the development of artificial intelligence and the power that's required for that, and they're taking out coal-burning plants all over the place, and they're saying, well, we'll use solar and wind. Well, solar and wind only operate a few hours a day at best.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's like they're trying to get rid of a lot of humanity, because like Yuval Harari has said, you're going to all become worthless eaters at some point. And so this is this cover from 12 years ago. And then there's this other one, Tony, The World Ahead 2025. So the Economist covers that they come out with, they're sort of predictive covers each year are very interesting. So like in 2019, they had the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, and it was kind of a mirror image, which is kind of an occultic. If you held it up to a mirror, you could read everything on the magazine cover, or you reversed it.
Yeah.
And now the world ahead this year, Donald Trump returns, trade wars, geopolitics. And then, so you have these pictures, and I don't know exactly what to think of all of them. So there's like an Earth on the one side. In the middle at the top is Saturn. I think that has occultic things. Below that, there's a city, which I'm not sure what to represent. Below that is an arrow, like a graph arrow going up. Then you have Trump in the middle. You have a rocket to the right of him. You've got a needle that's filled with, I don't know if that's filled with a treatment for a virus or that's a treatment of blood. Below that, you got nuclear energy because they're trying to do power. You got Putin. You got Ursula von der Leyen. You got electric car. There's a box and a wrapper. You got an arrow pointing down. You got Xi from China up there, and there's a bunch of digits like zeros and ones behind him. It's a very interesting. And then you got the fist with the red the red fist, like red power. And I'm not sure who that is at the bottom.
No, I'm not sure on that one either, but you got Zelensky off to the left there.
Yeah.
But it's interesting that they've got Donald Trump in the center of the whole thing.
Well, look, Trump, there are some things, Trump is very transactional. He's a deal guy.
Yeah.
And so you're going to see he's already pushing for deals, about the Middle East and what he's going to do. And people are changing things just because he's coming into power.
Yes.
I mean, and so there's some things that he does that I like, but then, he makes these statements and I don't really, Tony, I'll be honest with you. I don't know what to make of them. The way some people treat them, I'm concerned about they elevate him too much. And he talks about this golden age that he's going to bring in.
Yeah.
And so, and I'll be honest with you, I don't,
John, I believe Donald Trump's been chosen for this moment and has been for a long time. The man, before the 2016 election, I said it, and I need to do a video on it with the 777s with Trump and his first presidency and aligning all that with Christine Lagarde's speech in 2014, which was basically a 777 speech. And
which was one of the most bizarre public speeches I've ever seen in my life.
John, I believed what she was saying, and I said it in 2016. That speech was preparing the elites for Donald Trump's first presidency. That's what I believe that whole speech was. I'll
have to go back and look at it again. It was a bizarre.
Yeah.
Because I played it in my prophecy update, and I'm like, I'm not even sure what to make of this. I'm just saying this is really weird.
Yeah.
And she's still around, by the way, and I can't remember what I had. I had a video pulled out of her that I've not used just recently of her talking about, some globalist thing and identity and digital ID. And I mean, just this, it's clear that nothing's changed. That's what I guess the point to take from all of this.
And just very quickly with the 777s, Alistair Crowley did a book on the Golden Dawn, was titled 777, and there's a whole lot. I put Trump in there. I think that this is no coincidence. Trump's there, and the elites that follow this gematria numerology stuff, they know exactly what it's all about. So personally, I don't think it's any accident that Trump is there for this time. He's going to be the man to oversee what's going to happen.
It's so bizarre what goes on today in the United States Supreme Court. There was a transgender. Can the government restrict transgender, life-altering, body-altering drugs to people going through puberty? This is before the Supreme Court, and this lunatic that Ketanji Brown Jackson that Biden appointed, she's asking a question like, well, how is these restrictions on these drugs that will sterilize children, how's that any different from laws that prohibited interracial marriage? And I'm sort of like, what are you even talking about, you crazy lunatic? Yeah. So I see from my side, there's some transactional things that Trump will do that I like. I'm looking forward to Jesus coming back and solving all these problems ultimately, because I think some people put way too much onto Trump. I mean, that's a problem.
I think they do too, and I think if he gives what the conservatives want on certain things, that will keep them on board for all the other stuff. And he's going to be a big player in the Middle East. He's even appointed Jared Kushner's father, as to be an ambassador. And I mean, that guy has
ambassador to France.
Yeah, a pretty checkered past. I mean, he's not exactly
a
trustworthy.
Know who he appointed to be an advisor on the Middle East? Yeah. The father-in-law of his other daughter, Tiffany, a Lebanese guy,
right,
billionaire. So I guess if you want to be an advisor in the Trump, although I think he's run out of daughters now, he only had two, but both of their fathers-in-law,
Jared
Kushner's dad and Tiffany Trump whatever, it begins with a B, her last name, Boulos or something like that. Now, her father-in-law is up for being an important advisor on the Middle East and bringing peace to the Middle East, and he's Lebanese. Yeah. This is all very, look, it's all very, it's, as I said, there are things that I like, but then there are things that I'm sort of scratching my head like,
I think we're going to see big movements. Whatever, when 2025, it's going to be like probably an earthquake in terms of shifts in some of the things and stuff getting done. Exactly where it's going to go, who knows?
Now, what I see on this World Ahead 2025 is next to the hourglass looks like the all-seeing eye.
Exactly. Yes. Yep. And you've got the nuclear watchdog eye as well.
Right. And sometimes, that's right. That's an eye with the nuclear symbol. And sometimes I wonder, like, okay, are they trolling us? They know that this will upset us, but then I'm like, no, I don't think so. And I'm trying to look, I'll have to look at it. What's this thing that's sort of at the bottom of the picture of Trump?
Yeah.
Is it like a digital ID or something?
Could be. I can't exactly tell.
I'm just telling you, this is so crazy weird. There's a nuclear explosion down there. I hadn't seen that before. So maybe we need to do a program decoding the Economist cover 2025.
You know what I think, John? I think the Luciferians have this code where they reveal their plans covertly, and those that can figure them out get some clues. But I think perhaps that's a code that they have. They tell you what they want to do, and it's not necessarily in the same year that they put these covers out either. By the way, sometimes the stuff is down the road a little further.
I'm looking at this now. There's like something. I don't know if it's a maze or fingerprints there by Zelensky, and then to the right of that, there's like a smile, and it's red and black. You see that mouth?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yep.
I
hadn't seen that either. You're right.
Yeah. I'm ready for Jesus to come. That's all I can say.
Yeah.
Because I know that that's the ultimate thing, and I also want to caution people that there's a tendency for some people to say, well, if you voted for Trump, you voted for the Antichrist or whatever, and listen, and you're going to be duped by Trump. And I'm like, if we know the scripture, we know that there are certain specific signs associated with the return of Jesus. You're not going to see those, okay? I don't think you're going to see those, but Jesus will come back, and it's not going to be Donald Trump or Zelensky or Putin or anything like that. It'll be pretty clear. Yeah. So I just would caution people, don't be too quick to accuse everybody else of falling for it. That's not a good look, I don't think, in the Christian community.
Yeah, I don't think so either. I think it's like people just need to keep their eyes open from here on out anyway, and pray that God will give them wisdom and guidance, and that they won't fall for deception.
And do we think that about a year ago, I came across a video, and it was this big. It looked like a congregation singing a hymn. And it was like a religious hymn. And I looked at it and I thought, well, what mega church is this? And you know what it was? No. Then I noticed on the stage in the pyramid was an all-seeing eye. It was the Freemason Lodge in the UK singing this song. It was all Freemasons. And I'm like, okay, now that's really weird. And how did this popped up in my YouTube feed? Was I targeted for that or what? I don't know. I'm just saying there's a lot of things going on in this world that are very bizarre. So I think people need to stay in the Word of God, stay rooted in the scriptures, but pay attention to what's going on so you're not deceived by it.
And don't put your hope in politicians, no matter what country you're in or who's in power. I think that's another thing that people just need to really get their hope in the Lord and live their lives, pray for guidance, what they should do to prepare or whatever, and get their hope out of whoever's in power in whatever country. thinking that they're going to change anything and it's going to give a reprieve or take things back or, you know.
And by the way, even though what we talk about is kind of dark most of the times we get together, I don't live my life in fear.
Neither
because
do
I know where I'm going. I know you don't either. So I don't want people to think that we're just scared of everything that we see. No, I mean, my life is pretty normal, you know, except for reading the news and seeing or the legal decisions that come out or cases that it's bizarre. It's a very bizarre time to be alive.
Yeah, it is. It is a strange and difficult time, and yet I suppose in a way it's exciting if the Lord's about soon to return. We're in that final generation that, you know, we'll see a lot, and there's a lot I think we will see in the next few years if we're still here. And meanwhile, we got to just really have our focus on God, like you say, and trying to live our lives as Christians as best we can, you know, following what the things that Jesus told us to do, like, you know, everything that's in the Beatitudes and those types of things, and doing our best to walk through this life, to hear, well done, good and faithful servant at the end. That's really all that matters, ultimately.
That's right. But it's troubling. You know, there are things that are, and I'm not in control of anything, so that's that's for sure. Yeah. But you know, I do watch these things. I think we need to be watchful and aware because there is a lot of deception out there right now.
Yeah. But, and just, I mean, I know I said we'd be finishing about now, but just one more thing, which I suppose is another whole can of worms, is the deporting of illegal immigrants when Trump gets into power. I mean, and people, of course, by and large, the Americans that have been Americans for a long time are in favor of that kind of thing, but I just don't see that going smoothly either. And the potential for camps, internment camps, and borders being closed that could eventually keep people in as well. I just don't think it's going to go. You can't have 20 or 30 million people just going to put their tails between their legs and march back over a border to somewhere they don't even have safely to go back to. So,
will the people even take them back when they get there?
Exactly. So I could see big trouble coming, and maybe also that is part and parcel of why Trump's there, that there's more to this than meets the eye. So anyway.
Could be. We'll have to watch and see what happens. I'm sure we can talk about that in the future.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because it's not going to change. I mean, something's going to be done. I just don't know how much.
Yeah, well, I guess it's going to be an interesting year, 2025. That's for sure, John.
Sure is. Good talking to you as always, Tony. Give my best to Holly and everything, and take care.
And say hi to Pam from us too. So thanks again, John. It was a fascinating discussion.
Always enjoy it, Tony. Thank you.
Bye. Also, folks, please remember to visit us at aminutemidnight.com and subscribe to us down the right-hand side of the page where it says subscribe to blog. And we do run A Minute to Midnight by donations 100%. And thank you to the folks that donate. And if anyone else wants to help us, you can find a donation page at aminutemidnight.com where it answers your questions on how to donate. And there are some fields there which you can donate if you want to help us. Music used, I've written, played and recorded, and actually there's some free music of mine that you can download at aminutemidnight.com as well. God bless, and God willing, we'll be back with another episode in a few days' time.